Now we're going to hear from Gene Roddenberry himself. Now we're going to take a look at a quote of his, a very big quote of his, actually. I kind of feel bad that I didn't include this in the first episode. When I took another look at this quote, and then I hit the ceiling, and then I came back down, I feel bad that I didn't include this in the first episode. And so I'm sorry for that, because this is that big. So we're just going to get right to it. This quote can be found in the book Where No Man... It's an authorized biography of William Shatner, and it was published in 1979. And in that book, you can find this little interview between an interviewer and Gene Roddenberry. And part of that interview goes like this. The interviewer says, there is a great deal of writing in the Star Trek movement which compares the relationship between Alexander and Hephaestion to the relationship between Kirk and Spock, focusing on the closeness of the friendship, the feeling that they would die for one another, and there's another ... because it's kind of a springboard statement. It's like, hey, topic, let's talk about it. And he's, expecting Gene to respond. And before we get to Gene's response, just a little note about Alexander and Hephaestion. It was Alexander the Great and his right-hand man, Hephaestion. So this is ancient Greece stuff we're talking about. And apparently by this point in time it was pretty well known that of all the connections between Kirk and Spock and Alex and Hef, because there's a lot of them. I could actually spend an entire segment talking about the similarities between Kirk and Spock and Alex and Hef. And it was a deliberate thing. There are other quotes from Gene talking about how Alex and Hef was a direct inspiration for Kirk and Spock. But the interviewer probably felt it was necessary to say, the closeness of the friendship, because Alexander and Hephaestion were really good friends, but they were also in love with each other, and they were a couple. And so, they had sex, and they were a couple. And like when Hephaestion died, Alexander flipped his shit. Like, whoa, okay? So that's just a little bit about them. They were really good friends, but they were also in love with each other, and they were a couple, and they had sex and all that stuff. So that's what Alex and Hef, that's what that whole thing is. And so Gene's response to this subject goes like this. Yes, there's certainly some of that, certainly with love overtones, deep love. The only difference being the Greek ideal we never suggested in the series, physical love between the two. We certainly had the feeling that the affection was sufficient for that, if that were the particular style of the 23rd century. Now, I would take this moment to go completely fangirl on you and scream and say things of an exaggerated nature. But really, this moment is actually a bit too big for that. This is a bit too important to really go bouncing off the walls right now. So we're just going to go straight into the analyzation. Okay, so the first line. Yes, there's certainly some of that, certainly with love overtones, deep love. The yes, there's certainly some of that is obviously a response to what the guy was saying. Like, hey, they were really good friends. Yes, they were really good friends. But there was also some love overtones, some really deep love going on. And it doesn't exactly make sense for him to be talking about platonic love, because that'd be like saying, yeah, they were friends. Oh, and they were friends. Because redundant sentences are redundant. So it doesn't exactly make sense that he'd be talking about platonic love. And since we're talking about Alexander and Hephaestion and how they were lovers, I think he's talking about romantic love. I think that's kind of obvious. So you have the first line, yes, there was friendship, and yes, there was love overtones, and it was a really deep, deep love. And then he goes on to say, the only difference being the Greek ideal we never suggested in the series, physical love between the two. And that's completely right. They never suggested that Kirk and Spock had sex during the original series. They never did. What's really interesting about this sentence, I feel, is the beginning, when he says the only difference being. So the only difference between Kirk and Spock and Alex and Hef is that Alex and Hef got to have sex. So, and I mean, considering what he just said, the first line of Gene's response, so now he said, yes, they were great friends. They were also in love with each other. And so really the only difference was that Alex and Hef got to have sex. So Kirk and Spock and Alex and Hef both were good friends, both were in love with each other, but only one of them got to have sex. At least when we're talking about the original series. Now the movies weren't even out yet. This is 1979. This book was probably published around the time that the movie was coming out, as promotion and everything. But movies hadn't happened yet. And he's not talking about the movies. He's talking about the original series. Because he said that. And he finishes by saying, we certainly had the feeling that the affection was sufficient for that, if that were the particular style of the 23rd century. So, well, I mean, first of all, it kind of sounds like Spock. We certainly had the feeling that the affection was sufficient. Just kind of reminds me of Spock, which, makes sense because he kind of created the character. But so, he's obviously talking about sex because he just said that. He's like, well, they couldn't have sex. They wanted to, but they didn't because that would have kind of clashed with the 23rd century's style. So apparently in the 23rd century, people still have issues with homosexual relations. Not unlike the 60s. And that quote is about that simple. So, okay, let's recap for a second. Let's look over the whole thing. Gene Roddenberry just said in an official biography that Kirk and Spock were really good friends. They were in love with each other. And they didn't have sex during the original series. They wanted to, but they didn't because of homophobia. Now here's the part where I usually go through the arguments against this bit of evidence and, get sarcastic and be like, oh no, your argument's invalid because of this, and this doesn't hold any water, and this could be an argument, oh, but it's not because of this. And instead of doing that, I just kind of have a blanket statement. It's a very simple statement to all the people who know about this quote and still feel like they want to argue that Kirk and Spock were just friends. It's a very simple statement. I had a whole little kind of speech thing worked out, but I figured out that after I said the first line, it kind of got sarcastic without me even trying, and I really don't want to be sarcastic right now, and that's really difficult for me. So I'm just going to say the first line of the speech that I had worked out, and then I'm probably not going to say anything else, and we're going to cut awkwardly to the last segment. Because if I say anything after this first line, it's just going to get sarcastic really fast. So here it is. My response to people who would like to argue that Kirk and Spock were just friends once they know about this quote. Not wanting the sky to be blue doesn't make it green. Okay, so I don't have much time to wrap up the show today, so I'm going to have to go kind of fast with kind of bullet points, if you will. The Ship's Closet is now on Facebook, so head on over and become a fan. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm talking down to you guys every now and then, because I know I can say some pretty obvious things, or at least they're obvious to me. And I know that, it's kind of like, okay, Timmy, take my hand, we're going to cross the street now, but I really don't mean it like that. I'm just trying to cover all the bases, so I don't think you're like Rand stupid or anything like that. I just, I'm just trying to cover all of the areas that I possibly can in this type of analyzation thing that I have going. What else? I think that's it, actually. I think that's it for the show. Well, no, okay, no. There is one thing. This.
This tunnel goes back as far as the eye can see. Our best machinery couldn't cut a tunnel like this. Not even with phasers.
Indeed, Captain. I'm quite at a loss.
Yay, 60s. That's all I got. Stay tuned. I'll see you soon.